James, I want to make a video game.
Well, that's good, Spencer. Are you ready to keep working on the one we started before?
Yeah, well, except we haven't actually done anything. We're working on a prototype development plan. Apparently, this is the steps that we're supposed to be doing if we're actually going to build something to be successful, James. But we haven't actually done any coding or any artwork yet. And when do we get to that part?
Soon. Coming up soon. Soon, soon, soon.
Why is there a prototype development plan? We've already talked about all the mechanics and everything that we would want for a prototype. Why do we also need to do a prototype plan now? Isn't that just everything we've already set up through the process of preparing to make this game?
Do you remember all the stuff you talked about in your social studies classes from like grade 6 to graduating high school?
No. No, I
Okay,
just
that's
remember that
that's
my
why we're
teacher was
doing
from
this.
Slovenia, and he told us that a guy from Slovenia got killed on a toilet by getting hit by a cannonball. That's all I remember.
Brutal. But that's my point, right? It is there is so much talking that is done in development teams in general. Like you're just always in communication on some level, whether that's with your peer beside you, it's through a chat program, whether it's in meetings, etc. Usually what happens is it's very repetitive. We always talk about the same things, but things always change. And especially if you listen to us talk here, we talk about a lot of stuff. And it's just two of us. Could you imagine if we had like three other people for like a typical small team? So if you're not documenting what are good ideas, what are bad ideas, what do we want to keep, what do we want to throw out, by the time you actually start working, how much of that is actually still a part of what you think you're making? By writing it down, you're cementing it for the team. This is something like I mentioned before, is we're all on the same page. There's very little confusion. So that once we've talked about a particular system of or a mechanic, maybe how the character jumps, we have it written down. We've all talked about this. We've all had plenty of time prior to working on it to discuss what does that jumping look like? What's it supposed to feel like? Now, this is still early. I want to keep that, fresh in the mind that this is just early. It's hypothetical. Like this is what we want it to be like. It's going to change once we start making it because it'll become tangible, something we can actually see. Be like, I pressed spacebar. This sucks. Maybe it should have a slower drag down. Maybe it should fall faster. Maybe we have to fake gravity, etc. Right? Making it juicy is a term thrown around a lot by indies and like other people in the industry. That comes when you have something to tinker with, but we're not there yet. So we're in this weird in between space where we got to figure that out and write it down.
The question that I have in my mind is we've gone through like the stage that we're at right now is the two of us said we wanted to make a game together. We figured out what kind of game it was going to be. We talked about the mechanics. We figured out the basics of what this game is going to be, and then we're like, okay, we know all that. We're gonna make a prototype. So then why we've already talked about all that stuff. We've written a bunch of that down. Why are we now breaking down the prototype? Like we had a narrative game development plan, and now a part of this is also the prototype development plan. Haven't we already figured out the prototype, or am I just re-asking the same question I just did and you're about to give me the exact same answer?
Basically the exact same answer. So like we talked about it, right? But just because we talked about it doesn't mean we understand what we're doing, right? It's the same thing. Is we need to write this down in a format that I gave this to my spouse, you gave it to your spouse or a friend or just a random person, maybe somebody we want to ask money for to help fund the development of this project. Does that document that we give them a clear idea of what we want to do,
Okay.
right?
So this
So
is this isn't just us doing all the information over again. Like this is us taking that information and putting it into the format now specifically for the prototype.
yeah, so another way to look at this is we're making the blueprint. We've talked all about all the different options and the different things that we can add, but now we are cementing in plans. This is the blueprint to get to where we want to go. And it's important because this is the time to make cutthroat decisions. It's time to really decide how do we want to make transitions. It's time to decide what are the things that we actually need. Is this a two-story building or a one-story building? That's going to impact a lot of design decisions now and in the future. So this is the time to do that, is to create the blueprint.
Okay. I'm on board now.
All right, awesome.
So
Um,
what do? We start programming and start coding?
no, no. We haven't even discussed what that is yet.
I know.
I know.
I'm just looking forward to the time we actually open up a program and we start doing stuff. But I also
Um,
understand it's important to do all this stuff because it's going to make the actual programming and then the actual physically working on it easier. So,
well, I don't know about easier, but
or
it'll
better to
definitely make it
understand.
it'll definitely give it better direction and purpose, for sure.
Okay, so not easier to understand. It's still a hard process.
It's still a hard process, right?
Okay.
But this is also where a lot of people who are trying to make that transition from I've tinkered in game jams or I've contributed to small projects that like shipped but didn't actually build any sort of reputation for myself, or they never actually sold, and maybe my grandma bought a copy and it like occasionally on a Steam sale somebody buys it for like $1, but they never play it. Like my player count is like 3, but I've sold 10 copies. Like this is like when you're in that zone and you're trying to figure out, okay, like I spent a year developing a side scroller where all I do is just like jump over barrels. What went wrong? Like how could I get that far? Like what's that process, right? So what we're doing is trying to figure out that process and guide not only you but other people through the steps of what's really really important to think about. Like how do you really think about your game and say talk about all the stuff we've talked about so far: design, marketing, player expectations, just everything, target audience. How do we make all this together? And how do we find a team member, somebody who is on the same page as us? And then how do we have a discussion about the different kinds of ideas we had, like we did? We talked about the idle game and we talked about this narrative game. And after going through it all, we decided on the narrative game, right? And so, like, that's a whole process that a lot of people just sort of skip. They just go on to Reddit and are like, I'm looking for a team, and they jump into it and just think that it's
They
going to
would have
work
made
out.
an idle narrative game.
Yeah, well, it's complicated, and people want to get there as fast as possible, right? They want to like a rocket ship. I want to get going, and that's very admirable. You can't run if you can't walk. Can't drive a car if you haven't driven the bike. Fly the rocket ship, never flown a plane. Like we got to build up to it, right? And most people just don't know how to build up, and this is how we
Well,
do it.
wasn't there a movie where some farmer builds a rocket ship and then goes into space from like the early 2000s? Why can't we just be like that farmer, James?
I don't know. We got AI. Like, go on. No, well, the difference is like hypothetically, assuming we have all the training and we do everything right and we do all the testing and we have an infinite amount of money and we have an infinite amount of time, we could do that, but we don't. The reality is we don't. We have a very finite amount of money, we have a very finite amount of time, and all of that constantly fluctuates. So again, we're building the blueprint so that when those fluctuations happen in life, you have a means to stay anchored. You know what you're doing. You know what the next task is. So even if you have to step away for a week or something crashes and you just can't figure it out and you have to go take a course or something to figure out how to get past this roadblock, you still have the blueprint. You can come back and be like, oh yeah, this is where I stopped. This is where I can keep going. Which addresses the other big issue that many, many people who are trying to make that transition into, I've learned enough to start doing it, I want to do this like seriously to get some form of income, is consistency, right? Like you're going to get pulled away. You have to be able to come back and start working on the project again and not lose where you're at. You can't do that if you don't write things down. And it really cannot be as simple as, oh, I'm going to make a diary every day, right? Like that's a very common suggestion I've heard, and I will do that myself for certain things, but not for game design, not for game
I feel like a
development.
diary sounds great at first because at the beginning there's just a couple pages, but if it's a lot easier to have a like you don't just it's like planning this out. If we have our point A and point B, and then we have our diary that we're creating so that we can mark down on the map where we're at, then that's great. But if we have to go to the start of the diary and read all the way up to what we've done every time to be able to figure out where we're going to go next, that sounds pretty painful.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And your diary is always going to be subjective to how far you went back. Because eventually you're going to be like, I'm not going to read like 300 entries. I'm going to read the last 10 because I'm busy, right? So yeah, I don't think like dev diaries, they're not great, especially if you're using it as a means of tracking where you're going. You're just looking around to relative to where you are now and planning off of that, which is a very quick and easy way to get lost, right? Lost in development. Lost in development hell. But having the blueprint, how we're structuring this and talking about it, how we talked about all the design and everything, it's anchoring in the future. It's like, no, I want to get to that next hilltop. I don't know what this I don't know what the downward valley, trek is looking like, and I don't know what's waiting for me on that upward climb on the other side, but I know I want to end up there, right? So it's always going to be consistent because we're not changing this. This blueprint doesn't ever change. Almost almost never changes. Times
It
when it
never
changes
changes. Wink.
are usually when there's money involved, right? Like the only time it should change, or it will change, beneficially, of course, maybe, is when money is involved. When you have a publisher, when you won the lottery, when you decide to put into your life savings into this project. Don't do that ever. But when money of a sizable amount is involved in a prototyping project, that's usually when things change because now your ability to deliver on what you can do like changes drastically, right? That's the only time it should change, or like in a good way. Like any other time, it should not change. If you cannot figure out how to get to where that next mountaintop is with this development plan, with your prototype blueprint, you shouldn't be doing this prototype.
Probably not. If we couldn't do that with this, we probably wouldn't be able to finish the rest of the game.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the whole point of doing all this because I have met so many people in person who fall into that trap where they're just like, yeah, I poured life and soul and money into building a studio, building a team, building a project, and it just went through every problem imaginable, right? Every issue, and it didn't even do well, and it's mediocre, and I know it's mediocre, and like now I'm saddled. Some of them are saddled with debt, some of them are saddled with guilt, right? Like just like relationship guilt and life
Now
guilt.
I feel like you're trying to scare me into doing a prototype.
Kind of.
I don't know
Yeah.
if I want to make a game anymore, James.
Well, it's
I'm
like
kidding.
everything
I'm
else
kidding.
in
I
life.
still want to. I still want to.
I know you do. I know you do. But for
I'm just
everybody
being
else,
dramatic.
yeah, who's probably scared hearing that, like it's not to be scared. It's a manual, right? You read the manual of how to use the tools so you know not to do the dumb thing and, hurt yourself. It's kind of what this is. Is if you're following along and you're trying to apply this to the projects and the teams and stuff like that you're doing on your own work and it's not working out, chances are it's not because this process isn't working for you. It's because the process
James
is
had no
working.
idea what he was talking about, and you should come yell at him in the Indie Innovators Discord.
That too.
Link in the
But
description.
yeah, link in the description. Yeah, no, exactly, right? It's not perfect. That's a very good point. It's none of this is perfect. There's no right or wrong way to do it. However, just project management, running a business, running multiple teams, running projects for publishers, fixing projects that have gone way too far off the wrong end and bringing them back into alignment. This is all stuff based off of experience. And yeah, if you get this stuff down early, it saves you from the headache and the heartache later. Because again, if you're trying this and it's not working out, chances are your project or your team, something there is out of alignment. Something's not working. You need to revisit it.
In our last episode, we went back over all of the elements and parts that we want to incorporate into our prototype. So now, what do we do for our actual development plan for the prototype itself? Where do we start, James?
We start by hitting the share button. Sorry, podcast listeners.
Well, I mean, we're talking it all audio.
Yeah.
Everything we say will be heard, but there's also the video version on YouTube if people would like, if they find following along a Google Doc a little bit easier than just listening. So,
or come bug us on the Discord and ask us to go through stuff. Ask for tips.
Ask me any questions, and I will direct you to James.
Okay, so prototype development plan. Before, and we touched on this earlier, where we were just kind of highlighting all the core components, what they were, why we chose them. We already touched on that, right, last episode. So this is the actual development plan. Now it's actually defining it a little bit further. We're not doing this as 100% definitive, right? That's not what this is about. This is about just the roadmap. We know roughly we want to get to that other mountaintop, and here's where we lay it out. So for our first tab here, I have pre-production and planning, and our first topic here is game design. So in it, I just have some very simple bullet points summarizing everything of how we're going to go about building this prototype, which is finalizing detailed design document for the single prototype level, outline specific player trigger narration events, and I have in brackets here 2 to 3 events because it's always important to define and make goals measurable.
Yeah, because for
Map
anybody that
out.
might not be aware, like our narrative game that we're wanting to do, it's like a 3D walking through. There's going to be some events that our character interacts with that's going to trigger audio, and that's like part of the progression of the game. I don't know if just in case somebody stumbled across this episode, I've never heard anything. Is there anything else they would need to know about what we've got so far?
No,
I
I
feel like
mean
it's
if they're
the
following
bare
along,
minimum basics. So
yeah, I'm also trying to keep this somewhat entry level. But if you've been following along with everything that we've been talking about, this should be relatively straightforward. Um, Continuing on, uh, for game design here, map out the narrative's initial dialogue chain and the planned child interruption. Define the mid-scene world state rewrite triggered by the child, and create flowcharts for narrative paths and branching points within the narrative, within the prototype. This is like the very core, straightforward game design elements specific to this. This isn't for putting in things like character holds W to walk forward. No, that's very, very basic level, right? Like everybody needs some form of movement. We're not really going to touch on that. What we're specifically trying to target in this development plan are the things that are, your unique selling points or your unique features that are for this game that aren't going to be a part of any other game, right? That's what we're really trying to figure out in this development plan, is focus on those features. Next, in pre-production planning, I have art direction. So we need to establish a visual style guide for environments and characters, considering real-time transformation. When the world changes or when we're trying to depict that, we have to figure out what that actually looks like still.
now, is this something that's really in depth, or is it something more simple just to kind of go along with our prototype version? Like, it's not like we need to have everything figured out, the exact details for what the game is going to be like. It's just so that everything follows it like a similar art style for the prototype itself. Like, I'm
Yeah,
assuming once the
it's
prototype's done and we decide this is the game we actually want to go through, then this gets expanded on. Like, a lot of the stuff in here gets expanded on.
Yeah, so establishing a visual style guide, right, for environments and characters. Like that's very straightforward. It doesn't have to be definitive, but it just has to be some form of document that has it written down, a blueprint, if you will, specifically for how things should look. Like, are we doing a 2D crayon-esque colored cutouts, right? Using some form of image renderer, or are we doing 3D models with like hand painted textures, or are we going hardcore realism? Like that's really the level of detail that we would need to put into this. It's just to block it out, to be like, this is what we're gonna do, right?
Okay. And so, like,
And
for some of the stuff we're talking about here, like, it makes sense on paper, but when I try to visualize it and like what we'd actually be doing, like, I have a hard time grasping it. So I'm assuming when we get to these different stages, as we're like right now, we're just going through the development plan, and then we'll have other episodes later that'll go more in depth into these different sections as we're working on it for the game we're developing. Correct?
yeah,
Okay, cool. So then if there's something here that someone like myself doesn't quite fully understand, then we know there's an episode that's going to come out that will shed more light onto it.
so the other part of the visual style guide, to continue on with the answer here, is considering the real-time transformation. So because our game is going to have the world react to the interruption in dialogue choice, we have to figure out how that's going to look. So maybe that is a simple animation, doors that open up or a tree that like bends a different way. We should consider that. So we don't have to figure out how to do it. Not yet. We just need to consider what kind of transformation do we want that to look like so that when we are developing past a prototype, we know ahead of time, we talked about it and we want all of them to fold down like a pop-up book, just all the models just to like collapse in on themselves and stand back up. Maybe that's an option. Or maybe we just want purely, like I said, like the doors open and the lights turn on in the castle. Like that could be the consideration, but for all of the interactions, just so we have a baseline. And those are the two things that we're really concerned about with the visual guide is like what kind of texturing, visual art style should everything be, and then how are we trying to show artistically the world transforming. Uh, Along with the art direction is planning the initial concept art for the prototype levels, original and transformed states. So I have in here in brackets just 2 to 3 art pieces. And concept level doesn't have to be great. It could just simply be something that is of isometric. If you've ever looked at concept environment art, most of it is of like an isometric camera view. We just need something like that to show here's our initial level, here's with the 1 or 2 different states that we're offering players to choose through dialogue, and this is what they should look like. Like here's the changes. All of
Yeah,
that could be done very sketchy.
and just in case somebody's unaware of our game, when we're talking about the transform states, like in our game we have like the visual aspects that are going to be shifting and transforming. So that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Next we have is audio direction, right? And again, we are still in the pre-production and planning tab. And for this is outlining requirements for placeholder voiceover, including specific lines for narrator and child. So that's basically what do we want to say and which one of us are going to record the roles to get it in there for timing and everything else we need. And the next one here is define basic sound effects and needs for interactions and world transformations. So do we want to hear footsteps when the player is walking around? When we do those world transformations that we were just talking about, do they have a sound effect? Maybe we overlay a whimsical, I don't know, Tinkerbell tinkle with like a flute or something. Like or talking about it when we get to that point, does it change per transformation? If we go to a spooky castle, do we want something more spooky themed? Or if the option is to do more princessy unicorn style, do we want the audio to reflect that? That's something that we need to define at that point. Okay. And that's basically our pre-production and planning. Those are the things that are going to influence pretty well every other decision down the line.
I know if we hadn't been working on this together, one of the things I think I would have struggled with a lot was, because even as we're talking about some of the parts of the game design, like there's certain things where I'm like, oh yeah, we also kind of talked about doing this kind of thing, but it's like, no, that's not the prototype thing. So I got to make sure not to include that because that's not important for the prototype. It's important later on if we go past the prototype, but not not the prototype itself.
Yeah, and this is a great example of, to your earlier question before we started getting into this, of why are we even doing this? Right? Like, why can't we just like jump into the code? That's why. It's so that okay, like we have this massive idea, but what all we're focusing on is like the essence. Can we build the essence with the most bare minimum stuff and it turns out good? Because if we can, then this is a candidate to potentially get funding, to do not early access, but like maybe a Patreon. There's lots of indies who do that method. It's basically, it has something there. There's a magic, if you will. Somebody might like it to play this. If we do this prototype plan and we can't get there, then there's no magic. That's just the sad truth of being a software developer. There's just nothing here. So it's a very good sign after you do all this planning and you built it and it's just not working to stop. Don't build for another year going back and forth. like that's what this is for.
Well, because I got to remind myself too that we're not just making this to just this wasn't something where we were like, let's just make a game, I think it'd be fun. This was something where it's like, we want to make a game where we want to work towards a game that has the chance to be successful. And that's the difference why we're going through all this stuff.
Yes, yes. And I do want to highlight there, successful, right?
Uh-oh.
My approach to successful is not make us rich, right? Because that's just you don't get
Mhm.
that. Make us rich is like Silk Song, right? It doesn't matter if the game is good. It's got like 50 million people buying it because they liked Hollow Knight and they have a fan base. Like that's the make us rich scenario, and very few people have that, right? Success for what we're doing is, did we make a game within budget? Did we properly allocate? Did we design something that could actually be a fun game? And is it something that we could potentially market? That's success, right? It has to hit like those
Well, the
four
success
key
that we've
points.
defined for our game.
Yeah, well,
I
is
mean, because
success
success,
as a
it's this is a stupid thing, a way for me to answer to say this, but success is anything people decide their success is.
you're not wrong, right? You're not wrong. But it's also important to keep things within scope. The producer in me is coming out, and the scope of what we're doing, I am defining success as those four things, right? That it's a solid design, it's something that works out, because we could make an amazing game and it could still sell to like our moms, and then
Mhm. But I mean, in
right.
several episodes ago, that's also not in those exact words, but in the same meaning. That was what we defined as the goal of what we want out of all this. So
And again, that's why it's so important in the team building phase to be really thorough and ask all those questions that we put out, right? That you have to discuss that as a team, because it's going to stay relevant throughout the rest of the development. Anyways, getting back to the document here. So the next tab I have is asset creation, and our first topic here is narrative and dialogue. So we need to write the final script for the narrator's dialogue chain. We need the child's interruption dialogue. We have to develop the placeholder VO recordings for the narrator and the child, right? Which is just one voice actor each. And I have in brackets here that it's recorded by the team, because for the prototype, we don't need anything more than that. The next topic we have are art assets. That's creating 3D models or 2D sprites for the prototype level environment, the original state. So that's, I have in brackets here, that's going to be one environment set. And then we have create the models and sprites for the elements that will transform, which is going to be 3 to 5 transformable elements. I have that number 3 to 5 based off of the number of options that we have for the dialogue for the players to interact with. Next is design and create models or sprites for the transformed state of relevant environmental elements. So that's not just it's basically post transformation for those elements. Next, develop character models and sprites for the narrator. So it's model and the child if visible. So I have that in brackets invisible because we never actually decided if this is something where we wanted a character or not. I know for the child that we discussed having just no hands, it's just purely first person perspective. But we never discussed narrator. Maybe that is, and sorry, what that could mean is maybe it's just a UI icon with like a dialogue box in the corner, right? Like it's an icon of like a narrator with a funky hat, or a librarian, or like a dad or a parent, right? Like that's still an art asset we would need if it's visible. So we don't even need it, but I've included it anyway because it's important to account for that stuff. Moving on to the next topic is audio assets. That's recording all placeholder voice over lines for the narrator and child. So approximately 10 to 20 lines for the narrator, 5 to 10 lines for the child. Those numbers are purely just out of my butt because we won't know until we actually write it, but having a good estimate of that amount should be fine, just given a typical conversation.
now, what what I find interesting is if I had created this on my own, I would have probably put in like the recording audio assets as like a much later stage, like something after we've already gotten like the levels done and like the general like everything implemented, and then worried about and then thought about recording the audio after. Is there a reason why we're recording the all that now?
Time, mostly. So asset creation is going to make up the majority of what we're doing. Um, Creating systems and logic and stuff is actually pretty low key, right? Like you'll hear this often where game 80% of game development time is spent on the last 20% of game development, right? It's all the polishing and everything else. So the point with having creating the assets before implementation is because you can do whatever you want with them once you have them. But to create an implementation for something you don't have, which is a very common indie way of doing things, right, leads you to have to use like asset packs and random placeholders and things that just don't fit. And then what happens is you realize your implementation doesn't really work. So you have to change it and tweak it. And now your asset doesn't work. So you have to get a different asset to fit. And then pretty soon your game starts to look like an asset mashup, excuse me, or what happens is you spend so much time on the implementation looking right that you now have assets that don't work with your implementation and you have to recreate all those assets anyways. And in the process of doing that asset recreation, you realize your implementation doesn't work with the assets that you've wanted to make, like the way you want to make them. And now you have to update your implementation again. And now because your implementation is changed again, so it's a very easy loop to get caught in this circle like feature development hell, right? Where you're juggling new assets with new implementation and getting ideas and going back and forth. So the idea with developing your assets first and for a prototype build, that's the key thing here for a prototype build is that you're completely removing that process. You're just like, this is the tree, how I need this tree to be. I don't know how I'm going to implement it, but I know this tree is made exactly how I wanted it. So now when we go to implement it in a later stage, this tree is as is. We've already accounted for the stuff that we wanted, like a transformable state or the assets and particle effects. It's already made. We just have to combine them and have them interact the way we want them to. So it frees up that need to have to go back and visit the asset again. We're only going to worry about how to implement them. And that's much easier to iterate on and to do it effectively because you don't have to change mindset between content creation and then like asset implementation. I don't know if that
Okay.
answers your question, but
What's no, that does, because it also it brought up two things that I hadn't really thought about before. And the first one is going through this whole process, it's helped put my mindset in the right idea behind the medium of making a video game, because there were a lot of, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but there were a lot of biases that I had towards how to make a video game that was all based, and I didn't realize I had these biases until now, but it was all based on my experience doing video editing and producing videos. And so I had, like, there's a certain way I do the production of those. And in the back of my mind, I was like, obviously, and like with or maybe subconsciously is the right way of saying, but I'd already decided that the same process that I would go through with a lot of those aspects clearly is just the same thing for video games, and that's not it at all. So it's going through all this is helping me get a better understanding of the medium of producing a video game. I think that's the best way I can word it for myself. So
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
the other thing that I realized too is with our prototype, by making these assets now and then going to put it into the game, it feels like it's forcing us more to have the plan done on how it's all going to be used. Because if we went and set everything up and then made the assets after, then it'd be too easy to be like, well, you know what if the tree actually could hold apples so that we could do something with those, versus we have nothing to do, like there's no plan for apples or anything like that. We've already made the tree is now in place for the prototype. We know what needs to be done for that, and it's less likely, it feels like, that the scope's going to be, creeping.
Yeah, it's what I was gonna say. This is basically scope creep, right? This is one of the tools to combat it. Is you take your blueprint, you get all your materials together. Now you can't really change it, right? And this is something that's very common in or like akin to waterfall development with like construction, right? Like you don't buy materials, and then build a plan, and then like decide, oh, we're like, I really like granite. Now I'm going to change the bathroom. Like, it doesn't work
Well,
that way.
sometimes.
Well, sometimes, but you know what? Those are always the bad projects, right? The best projects are the ones who figure out the blueprint early. They go buy all the materials and then they start assembling together, right?
Yeah, so that way
Because
you can't
that's
be
the
halfway
most,
through your shed and be like, you know what, I want to do another door here.
yeah, like it's the most efficient and effective use of your time and money using that hardcore, like rigid form of development. So this is a way, this is a side tangent, but I can't help but not touch on it. This is a great way of how you combine waterfall development, your typical project management, with agile development, which is more software, development oriented. So we want to be able to move quickly. So we're writing all this stuff out in a way where we have determined end goals, but how we're going to get there, we haven't decided because we haven't started. So we're allowing us breathing room to, like you said, figure out, okay, trees and apples and like what's this tree going to look like. And then during implementation later, we don't have a lot of wiggle room to go back and add different things. Because the moment you start adding something, you're going to naturally want to add something else. And, now your scope is, you got scope creep. So yeah, it's a great way to cement it. And like you said, pipeline is great too, because when you go through all the art stuff, trying to import it in an engine, a lot of people, especially people using Blender, I don't, but most people I know who have problems getting stuff into the engine are typically Blender users. And so having to figure out a way to get your own work into the engine first is going to raise, a pipeline process you probably didn't think about. I'm not even accounting for that in this because I know what I'm doing, and I know that you have enough 3D background to know that that's not going to be an issue
Wow,
for
we're gonna
us.
find out if I remember all that.
Well, art-wise, we said we have audio, so there might be issues with audio, right? But this is why we do that. We create the assets first so we can run into those problems while we're doing a prototype, so we don't run into them
Oh
later.
yeah, because it would suck if we've got everything ready to go and now suddenly we realize now we're like, all right, now we just got to put in our assets. So we make those and realize, oh crap, now this can't work. Does that mean everything else can't work? And now we're going to have to redo the whole thing?
Studios and teams who get funding for the first time always screw up here. No, well, I shouldn't say always. Mostly screw up here
Yeah,
because
mostly
they got
because
the
we're one of
money.
those that won't.
Yeah, you get your money and you figure, oh, okay, now we can like properly develop. Now we can properly put in the assets. Now we can properly create the stuff. And then all of a sudden, now you're doing it for the first time. When you have money, you've hired staff who are now creating content that doesn't work with your engineering. And now what's the plan? Like business oriented, right? Team studio oriented. Well, you have a problem. The problem is you're paying people to basically create work that's not working, right? It's not going to work. Or you're paying them to sit on their thumbs and like just, I'm waiting until I am told how to format this so that the engineer can work with it and vice versa. So now it's a serious issue because if that I've seen some teams get held up for like weeks depending on what they're doing, right? The kind of game designer, when you think of like a full team of 5 or 6 getting paid a proper full-time wage because they have funding, that's like a huge chunk of money and a huge chunk of time that you probably didn't budget for that's now gone because 1 or 2 people had to figure out the pipeline problems and then teach everybody else. So it's like a full month's salary for an entire studio team, which, that could potentially be like $100,000 depending on your team size. Easy. Just poof, gone, right? Maybe not quite on the small indie side, but still, that's $10 to $20,000 from your only $100,000 for funding that's gone. Now it should be very clear why a lot of teams who do get funding still struggle to release a game because they ran into these kinds of issues and they just didn't account for them. They didn't think about it. They didn't have a plan for how to at least try and encounter those problems and solve them prior to full development. Anyways, there's a lot of good reasons to do what we're doing, basically, is what I'm getting at. So, audio assets. Next is sourcing or creating the basic sound effects for player interactions. So I'm saying 3 to 5 distinct sounds, and I'm just hypothetically thinking about our game, everything we've talked about. That could be footsteps, that could be picking up certain objects. If we pick up if we have a bell, we decide when we pick it up, it should probably ring a little, right? That makes sense. That's a good feeling, a good feedback system. So that's going to need a distinct sound. We're going to need narrative dialogue for background ambience and cues. So 2 to 3 ambient sounds. This could be wind whooshing. This could be just a casual background music, something that's just crickets, right? Something that makes the environment and the scene feel alive. We're going to need a child interruption cue, so a very distinct sound. Um, I've put that in here because we're not just going to have like the character jump in. Maybe there's a sound chime that comes off to let the player know, hey, this is about to happen. That's a very good feedback system to account for early. And we could, this is off tangent, but we could use it as a warning system. So if you go over this way and a chime starts to play, it's like, oh, okay, this is going to affect something, but I still want to go over there. So I'm going to explore before I like commit to a change, right? So that's how we could effectively use that. Next is world transformation sounds. So it's the sounds of objects appearing, disappearing, textures changing, animations playing, and I have 3 to 5 transformation sounds because that's kind of what we're budgeting for is 3 to 5. Well, I think it's 1 to 3 dialogue changes, but 3 to 5 things that change in the game world. So they should each have their own sound. We could have them all have the same sound, but it makes more sense, pardon me, to have a different sound for each because in a prototype phase, that's really that's what we're after is this like whimsical changing world presented from like a child. So we would want that. That's why I made that decision versus, just one sound versus a bespoke sound each.
No, that makes sense.
And finally, for audio and assets, we have develop a basic adaptive music track for the prototype level. So it's one music track with 2 to 3 variations. Now, for those of you not familiar with audio design at all, an adaptive music track is something where it has and I hope I'm doing this justice, this definition, but it's basically you have a basic music track, and then depending on what's happening moment to moment, an extra layer is added to change the whole composition. It's
Like
still the
added or
same
removed.
track. Yeah, it's additive or it's removed. Additive is easier, but it's an additive track that's just layered on top to give it more life, to make it more appropriate for what's happening. So
So if it
if
was like a
you're
band, it'd be like the drums would start playing, and then if they went one way, the guitar would start to come in, or if they went the other way, then like the bass would start to come in.
Yep, it could be
Like,
different instruments. It could be different
I'm just
tempos.
trying to think of it like a really simple
Yeah,
kind of thing.
exactly. So
Okay.
the easiest way to think about that in terms of like other games is like Elden Ring. When a boss moment comes up, the track gets a little quieter, and then like a unique track for the boss monster, if you've ever noticed this, will start to play for that encounter. But it's still in the same timing and tempo. Now that's very high level,
That's
high
so cool.
production. Yeah, it's very high level, high production work to do that. We're not doing anything like that. But we just want to have like here's like hokey pokey folk music or something that's playing,
Well,
and
I mean,
then like if we
our
go,
game can our game's gonna rival that of Elden Ring, James. Like, let's
well,
don't
this
sell
is
us
how you
short.
start. This is how you start to build to that is what I'm getting at, right? So yeah, we just want a basic track, and then depending on like let's say good answer versus creepy answer, that would change the music, right? We would want the music to incorporate violins, and now it's more whimsical, or maybe we want it to incorporate more woodwinds or string instruments and or sorry not string instruments like percussion instruments, and now it's more of a creepy vibe, but it has the same basic track. If we left that area, we would want those additive tracks to blend out, and all the same rhythm and timing of the original track is still playing, is basically how that works.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and they're not terribly hard to implement, but to do the track can be a bit difficult.
Yeah,
So,
I was expecting you to say it's not hard to do, but it's hard to do well.
well, I mean, that's a given. So now we're on to the next tab, which is implementation and development. So we've already discussed our design goals, our core concepts and whatnot, and we've already decided on what assets to make, and we've assembled them. Now it's time to put it all together. So the first topic here is game engine setup. So This is just setting up the game project in the chosen engine, right? And implementing basic player character movement and interaction system. This probably might sound like duh, right? Like in terms of like thinking about it, right? Like, oh, that's was you can't make a game without booting up Unity or Unreal or something, right?
Well, I
But
just
if
look
you
at it as like it's a nice, easy thing to check off to be like, yeah, look at what we did.
Yes, yes, that's part of it. The other part of it is you always find out later if there's issues with plugins maybe you want to use, or there's issues with certain assets not being included in certain templates you want to start with. If you're Unreal, maybe you want to use the third person character template because it's got quick, easy controls, and then you discover there's no crouching ability like default, right? So in setting up the project, you'll find that out and you'll have to figure out how do I implement that and how do I get the animations to support that. So that's why it's its own goal, even though it seems so simple and straightforward. It's because it's a catch-all.
Well, it also helps too for our game. It's mostly just player movement and an interaction system. So once we get that done, we're laughing.
Yes, yes. But yeah, for in general, you should always include the initial setup as its own thing. For us, part of that would probably I should probably have added in here is a version control system, something to like Perforce, GitHub, something along those lines. This is the level of the prototype development where that would happen. It's right in the beginning. Get it set up, get it hooked up, get it going.
So for the game engine setup, if we were making a first-person shooter, would we also have like make sure gun can shoot as a part of the like the game engine setup, or would that is that like a still considered a different enough of a thing that it would go in a different part of the implementation and development?
Well, it's still a part of implementation and development. I think that it probably should be early, right? Whether you want to do that in this initial first opening up the project or you want to do that in the first like implementation of the character, if you want to do that as a separate tab, which it could be. It's just for our game, right? Our prototype. We don't need it to be separate. It could be done at the same time because it's super simple for us, given the kind of game we're making. So all of this, it's a good point to bring up that if you're listening and following along, all of this stuff is just based off of our current prototype. It can change. This is just a general guide and a rule of thumb. Figure out what kind of design you're doing and what are the core elements, right? That's really what I'm trying to focus on is what are the core pieces of your prototype design? What did you discuss? What did you decide on? What are the pieces that would make that possible? At a bare minimum, you don't need 100 guns. You just need one gun that shoots and maybe another gun that shoots differently. Maybe a handgun versus like an automatic weapon of some sort because that requires a different implementation. But at a bare minimum, that's all you need because every gun after that is going to use the same mechanics and systems as those two types of weapons is what I'm getting at, right? So whatever the core early step is what should be done first.
Makes sense. At least I think it does. I'm sure if we were working on a different project, I'd be like, oh, well, I wasn't expecting this.
It changes. It changes from game to game, right? And unless you've done a few of these, it's really hard. It's really hard to know where to go. But if you have questions, you know where to go. Indie Innovators Discord.
In the description
Wink.
below.
Wink.
Wink.
Yeah, so the next topic here is narrative system implementation. So we need to develop or integrate a narrative scripting system to manage dialogue flow. How and when, like how quickly. We need to implement the logic for the player-triggered narration events. So this is, as we discussed, is this location-based? Is it going to be triggered off of a volume? Is it item interaction specific? We discussed having different variations, I believe. But this is when we would implement that logic. Next is to program the child interruption event to trigger at the designated point. So not only do we need to implement the logic to trigger the narration event, we need to program the child interruption. So that's the audio, potentially subtitles if we get to that point, to trigger off of that event and to know what it's supposed to play. And then we have implement the world state rewrite logic triggered by the child. So that's just when the child makes a decision and it goes to affect the world, how is that actually handled? How does the game know what interaction the child has chosen and what assets need to change and what do those assets need to do.
I think something that'd be, sorry, this is kind of a little off topic, but if there's other people out there listening to this that are working on a video game and we're at this part and they're like, I have no idea what's going on, this is so confusing, like what would I even do for my game, then reach out to us and let us know what your game is, share your game design document that you have so far, and then it'd be interesting to do if there's some interest in it, a couple other episodes where we just do implementation of development, but we just look at other people's game design docs, and then we just go through and just like, not like fully break it down, but just go through like certain aspects that people might be having some confusion with. And then because I think it would be really valuable for me too. Even if we just did one of these where we just grabbed like 6 different genres, and then we were just like, yeah, here's what the game engine setup might look like for like this genre and this genre and this genre. And I think something that might be pretty valuable. So if
I think so too. It would be a lot of work. There's a lot.
It would be, but I mean, like we wouldn't do like
for.
super in depth. We would just kind of like go through some of the like just to kind of give some more ideas of it. But if anybody's working on a video game themselves and they're like, hey, do this for mine, then reach out to us, send us your game design doc, and we can then it'd be kind of fun to also see what other people are doing. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's a community thing, right? It's the more independent developers of the same like mind working together, talk to each other, knowing who has similar processes. It really helps, especially in the industry. Most of it is who you know. So yeah, like.
Or even just pitch really weird ideas. So we have to make James work really hard, like an idle clicker called Booty Slapper, where it's just a big butt that every time you click on it, it slaps the butt or something like that.
They have one of those. I forget what it's called, but it's a cat. But yeah, no. If any of the stuff that we're talking about is resonating and you agree with it, maybe even if you don't agree with all of it, but you like the idea of the process and the mentality, yeah, certainly join. We're a very small community in the Discord so far, but I'd love to bring in more people and just have, contacts who you could talk about some of these processes. Who, yeah, even if it's not you or I.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's stuff too that James hasn't considered and hasn't thought about. So.
Oh God, yeah. Like I
wish I
could know it all.
I have no idea what we're doing.
Yeah, there we go. Anyway, continuing back on. The next topic here I have after narrative system implementation is visual transformation system. So we need to develop a system for real-time asset swapping or manipulation, integrate environmental assets for both original and transformed states, and program the visual transformation to occur precisely with the child's interruption. So it's pretty much as straightforward. What I've described is we just need to create a system that knows how it's supposed to swap assets or play an animation, etc. And it has to have a way of doing that in timing with the child's interruption. That's going to be important for our case because we have potentially an item-based one where it only happens when a player interacts with an item, or it's volume-based. And if it's volume-based, we don't actually know where, when, or how long it's going to take for a player to interact with that volume, depending on where it is or what shape it is, right? So it's important to know that the system we make, which is not as complicated as it sounds, it's just a function call of saying when we overlap this volume, hey, manager, go do this thing with these assets. And the manager looks up its library and says, oh, I have to play this animation and this sound with this model. Done. So it's a lot simpler than it sounds, but that in essence is all we're talking about here. The next topic is audio integration. It's integrating all recorded placeholder voiceover, implementing sound effects for all relevant interactions and events, and integrating adaptive music and ensuring it reacts to narrative shifts. That is our adaptive track we talked about.
So you have the placeholder voiceover. Because since this is a prototype, it's very likely we're just going to record the audio ourselves just because it would be, I mean, it's a prototype. It'd be possibly a waste to just go and hire a bunch of professionals to come in and voice this stuff that might not even become anything.
Exactly. And really, all you want with placeholder voiceover is timing. Right? Like we don't have to act well We just have to read the line in the manner and tone that we would expect it to be. And that acts as a guideline, first of all, for a VO actress or actor, right? So they know what they should aim for, but it also allows us to know roughly what the timing is for coding, right? If we're doing some subtitles that scroll across the screen, it's way more complicated than it sounds, but that needs timing. We need to figure out how long that should stay on screen for. We need to know all those different things. So this is a very quick and early way to get access to that. Personally, I like to code these kinds of systems to play based off of when audio ends. So then it doesn't matter. It's modular, right? If it's a short line or the actress takes it a bit further and adds some extra stuff in it, maybe like a deep sigh, and we really like it, if we code it right to account for that change, we don't have to reprogram it. We don't have to rechange the timing. It's just based off the timing of the track.
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
just a good tip. It's just a good tip. Yeah, don't hard code things with specific references. Allow it to be dynamic, and you'll have a much better time.
Well, I thought you said we're supposed to hard code it and always go back and reference the original hard code, and then never make it so that it can like, you know, continue on properly. It's always just got to go and revert back to the original.
No.
I must have misheard you then.
Yes. Glutton for punishment. So the next topic here is level design and implementation. So it's building
what I thought was going to be the first thing that we did before we did any of these documents.
Right. Seeing it laid out like this, does it not
it makes
seem
sense. It makes sense.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Like, how
It'd
are you going to level design without anything?
Before.
Yeah, right. But most people just don't think that way. They're just like whiteboxing. Like, I love whiteboxing. It's amazing. It's so useful when you know what you're doing.
Well, because back then it's like, do what I see, and I see that there's a level, and so I got to make the level before I can make a game.
It's a big trap. Personally, I really don't think that beginner developers should be worried about whiteboxing, especially in their first games, because it's misleading. It assumes that you have so much knowledge and experience based around level design, just as like a principled position, or professional position, excuse me, that you can whitebox and know what you're whiteboxing. Because most people just whitebox as like, oh, this is where the stairs are and this is where this is, and like that's such a rudimentary summarized version of what level design is.
That's what I thought whiteboxing was.
that's what most people newer to trying to design games think it is, and it's only such a small piece of it, right? But that's always why they struggle later, and then you always see like devlogs like a year later where somebody's like, yeah, I redid my whole level design and now it works so much better. And it's like, well, yeah, because you spent a year developing assets to try and mash into this like cubed up space, but you didn't have any implementations. So now we go into that development hell that I talked about earlier. That's why that happens.
Imagine how cool our class in or college when we made a video game. If we knew all this stuff, and even to like 10% of all this, and we did this for the prototype, like the little mini game that we made in class, how much cooler would our game have been? It would have been so much better.
I wish we still had that build. I do think about that from time to time. I'm like, we should like revisit that or something one day. And then,
yeah, I don't have any of my stuff from that.
No, don't even have footage of that thing.
I think, I've just got my one level on my demo reel on that old website we had to make as a part of school.
Oh, what was that website? Carbon Made.
Yeah, Carbon Made. Yeah, I don't think it's even around anymore, is it?
I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, tangent over. So level design and implementation. It's build a single prototype level in the game engine, assembling all the stuff we've made, basically. Place interactive elements that trigger narration events, and ensure proper lighting and visual fidelity for both world states. So we just want to make sure that it looks nice. What's most beneficial here is that when we go to do this stage, we'll have all the stuff ready to assemble, just like a Lego kit. It's just we don't have a set instruction manual, but we have all the pieces. So we can just like move stuff around and figure it out. It's much harder to do that when you're using gray boxing. And it's also hard to do that when you're using placeholder assets, because assets change. And like I said, if you open
Yeah.
up yourself to that revision cycle, it's always going to change, right? And anytime you change like your forest assets, it's going to change your level design. So not only are you going to have to deal with the scope creep of tweaking your implementation, you're also now going to have to deal with the level design iteration every time you do that as well, because maybe something changes. So
Yeah, because it's like if we white boxed it and then later on put the model, we could be like, ah, crap, our statue is either too big or it doesn't fit in the room now. So we've got to either redesign this or make the room taller,
yeah,
or now the railing's too wide on the stairs and so it doesn't work with this other thing. Like,
yeah,
there's
and
just
so
so many problems that could come into play unless we get lucky.
yeah, so like proper gray boxing, right, is after you already understand your art direction, you already understand your lighting direction, you already understand all of color theory and all of those artistic things, in addition to all your design logic, needs, like if levels have to be so high, stairs have to be at this angle, et cetera, et cetera. When you just know those things and it's consistent, you can gray box because you just know it's going to work because all the other stuff works. But if you start with gray boxing, you don't have any of that. Like you said, you don't know the scale of things. Maybe you create a really great art piece that has to be lit from a certain angle, and in your gray boxing, you're like, okay, it's supposed to go here, and you get all your other assets in, and you're like, you know what? Now that I see it all together, it doesn't work very well. Again, what do you do at that point? Well, you have to change something. And if you've done all of your implementation and everything else based around your gray boxing, you potentially run into a lot of issues. I'll stop there.
So, well, quick question then. So, for gray boxing, that doesn't begin until you already have like a list of like all the like sizes things are supposed to be. So it's like if we know once the tree's been modeled, we know it's supposed to be like X by like this by this by this, so that way they can just put in the box and then start like like quickly putting together some ideas for the levels.
Yeah, so in a more how do I word this? In a more established team or studio, they can get away with gray boxing like that. They have a guide. They know that the character is this many units high. They know that trees are supposed to be this many units big by this many units round. They know that trees you cannot navigate under, so they can just be a big cylinder with a cone on top, right? Those are like bespoke design rules for the art design, which you can implement into your level design if you know them. If you know railings all have to be of a certain height, if you know they're all a certain thickness, you can gray box them. That's fine. But the chances are, with a newer team, with a newer prototype, you don't have that. You don't know it. So to gray box too early can be detrimental because you're just assuming that things will work when you put it together. You don't know that, and you don't have the experience to know that.
So if I'm Naughty Dog, then I have all that stuff probably figured out from the other games I've made, and it's easy to do. But with our game, because we're gonna have all of the assets, because we're making the assets in the beginning, it sounds like we might not even really have much of a gray boxing because we're just gonna have our assets that we're pulling in and moving it around. And because we're a smaller team, that's typically how it might go. Versus a large team where they're working on all those different aspects possibly at different times. That's why gray boxing comes into play.
Yeah, so if we, there's very popular GDC talk on level design for Uncharted. Their gray boxing, they have all the different, like they lay out the rough level layouts of where they want the player to go, and they have ladders and objects where they symbolize, hey, you can climb up this, and it has logic already made for them to like climb up. It's just final art hasn't been placed. That's okay because you're gray boxing where the player is moving and you already have pre-made implementation objects. You're just waiting on the final art director to make up his mind for concept art and then the artist to make the ivy and the stone and to decorate it and make it look nice. But that's
Okay.
polish, right? That's polish. That's all stuff that happens much, much later. Earlier in the prototype phase, we still need all those interactable objects. We need ladders for Ethan to climb up, even if they're not like full on animated ladders. Maybe it's just like Ethan's there and he just runs in the spot and floats up the ladder. Like that's fine for prototype because it gives you a sense of like climbing. It allows you to do stuff with the AI to prototype shooting mechanics. You can work with it, right? But again, a big studio like that has years, decades of development experiences into those franchises. When you're a small studio, you don't have that. So all of us going back, and I'm just going to scroll up here for the listeners here. And when we're looking at the game design and we're looking at the art direction and we're looking at creating the art assets and the audio assets, really what we're doing is we're creating the, quote unquote rules that are going to define our level design. After
Okay.
we're done this prototype, and here's the thing, after we're done the prototype, we can take all of this stuff that we have learned and developed for the prototype and use that as our rules to graybox all future levels. Every level we do in the future, we already know how high our character jumps. We already know what the interaction elements are. We already know the spatial fit of how the character navigates the world, so we're not going to place objects too close to each other. Or we're going to know how the camera, right, the perspective of the player, the camera works, so that we know how to create interesting backdrops because we already have that information. We already know the art style of our trees because we've already done some concept art. Then it's okay to do gray boxing because we've established that baseline rule for how the world is supposed to look, how it's supposed to feel to navigate it. So it's okay then, right? So that's the biggest thing I wanted to describe here is we're purely doing prototype. And in prototype, no, it's better to get the assets ahead of time so that you can figure out all those rules. And then if it works, now you can gray box. Now you can do all that
Oh,
iterative stuff
okay.
to make it look great. Because if you spend all that time gray boxing and shifting things around and finding the right like lighting and stuff for the church example or whatever building that we talked about, that's just wasted time in prototyping that we don't even know if the concept works. Right? So there's a reason that we don't do it now. And the reason is like I said, we lack the experience. And even me, with my experience working with you or anybody else, I would still say we lack the experience because we're building something that nobody on the team has built before. We're building something that hypothetically doesn't exist on the market. So, like, where's the baseline experience going to come from to know how to do it? It doesn't exist until we do it.
What's also comforting to know is that once we finish the prototype and if and maybe finish the game, the next game we go to make, even if it's not exactly like this, even if it's slightly different, most of our base groundwork is already done here, and we can transfer a lot of these documents and things over to the next thing. So it's not like we're starting over from scratch again.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
of course,
So
depending on what's going on, a lot different things. Maybe a lot has to change, but the basic groundwork is already laid.
yeah, this document, right, that we're going through is essentially your basis for a game treatment, which is your full on like hardcore design, everything written out down to like equations and formulas and you name it, with like art bibles and narrative bibles and like
Yeah,
this is the
the
basic form
nerdy
of it.
science stuff.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like this serves as the foundation for that document, which makes it
That's
much
awesome.
easier to write in the future because I've seen a lot of teams not even write stuff like this and then they have to do the game treatment and they're like, I don't know, like some of this stuff is magic.
I feel like I have this revelation almost every episode. Because I'm like, oh man, it's so good that we're doing this, and then we learn new stuff. It's like, oh man, it's so good that we're doing.
Well, so many developers, new developers, struggle because everybody wants to skip the hard stuff. They just want to get into the fun. They want to do level design right away, and they don't realize that yes, there's an element of truth when all the people on YouTube or who out there who are sharing the message that you just dive in and make something because it doesn't matter. Your first game sucks. Like just like go for it and learn the process. There is an element of truth to that, but it's also true that if you just fire an arrow in the dark, randomly aiming, like you're going to get better at shooting an arrow. Does that mean you're going to be better at shooting a target?
Yeah, are you even learning how to shoot it properly in a way that's going to be beneficial for you in the long run?
Exactly, right? And I think that that's just such a big distinction, and something I see when I talk to other producers and other owners and other people who have made the journey, if you will, from like I like games, I want to learn about it, to I've shipped games, is there's that big disconnect there where it's like, well, this is flashy and fun for YouTube, it's interesting, but is it like an actual educational resource that's like going to help you do it properly? Probably not. And does any studio do it that way? No. Why? Because they want to make money. Like, you can't. Naughty Dog does not just like take their entire team and be like, okay, we're gonna fire arrows in the dark until it works. Like that does not happen. I mean, it might feel like it with some AAA games, but that's not what actually happens, right? There's a lot of work that's put in up front to decide whether or not it's even worth it. Um, so yeah, it's level design and implementation. I think it personally, I just think it's good. Have all the assets and then figure that stuff out, because that's what prototypes are for, figuring it out. Moving on, the next tab we have here is testing and iteration. So the first topic is functional testing. That's verifying all the narration events trigger correctly, confirming the child interruption and world transformation function as intended, testing narrative and child dialogue pacing and logic, and check for bugs and glitches in gameplay and visual. It's your very basic bug checking, basically. The next topic is user experience testing. It's not the same thing. It's different. We need to assess the clarity of player interactions. Is it even clear what the player can do? Does the bell that they can pick up notify to the player in any way that they can pick it up? It's pretty important to figure out. We need to gather feedback on the narrative child dynamic. So that means giving it to testers, giving it to family, giving it to friends, giving it out to random people that we trust to give us constructive, honest feedback. And then we need to evaluate the impact and effectiveness of the world transformations. If we have all this logic in and then the transformation happens and it's just kind of like, oh, that's neat. Is that what we're going for? Or do we want it to be like, whoa, I was not expecting that. Like, that's cool. That's probably something we want to aim for. Well, we need to figure out if that's actually what's happening, and not just because we think it's happening. And then we have refinement. Address identified bugs and implement necessary fixes. Adjust pacing and timing of narration and interruption based on testing feedback. Iterate on visual transformations to enhance impact. So that's if it's effective or not. What can we do to fix it, or at least get to where we want it? And then it's refine audio integration for a more cohesive experience. So with all of that, there is an element that I've been talking about, not element, I've been talking about this idea, this theme, that the prototype should be kind of like your catch-all moment, whether or not the idea is good enough to continue developing or it's not good enough to do it and we should just move on, right? What's hard is this last testing and iteration phase, because some people don't know how to decide whether or not something is working or it needs to a full redesign. And if you need to redesign it, then the idea isn't working. Like it, and is it because it's a small change? Like, is it just changing the visual impact transformation, or is it something where the actual like core concept just isn't there? Most people, after they put in, like, you see how much work we've put in so far and we haven't even started, right? It
Hmm.
would be really hard to set this down when you're at this stage, because it's basically made, it's just not great, and you're like, how do I polish this turd so it's great, right? So many people get trapped in that phase, and it's not
Yeah.
exclusive to game development, it's just life, right?
I mean, you can put sprinkles on poop, but it's still poop.
Still poop. Yeah, unfortunately, right? And so that's the biggest challenge here. And, my advice when it comes to this is to really stick to your core initial conversations. Like, what is the design? What are we trying to aim for? And has what we made, whether it matches our expectations or not, is not the thing we should be looking at. Did it achieve what we set out to do? Is the thing that you should test. For us, that's a project to show people how to do this planning. It's a project that's something that could potentially be marketable. It's something that could be interesting and fun to interact with. That's kind of like where our goals are. It's more of a learning opportunity. So if we've met those goals, then we're okay. Even if it's not the greatest game in the world, that doesn't matter, as it didn't match the goals that we set out to accomplish. And if it did, great. If it doesn't, and part of that problem you find is because, the gameplay is bad, it doesn't feel good, doesn't look good, the art style sucks, whatever it is, then you need to scrap it. We got to scrap it. We just say, you know what? That was a fun experiment. Now we know for the future that this combination of things does not work, and you move on.
I think it makes sense.
So yeah, my point with all that is it's okay to try to iterate and polish a little bit on a prototype, but you always got to make sure it's serving your goals. If it's not, again, axe it. If it is, then yeah, you can continue with it. Maybe market it, get publishing feedback, continue developing another level, see what it's like with the market. Like, yeah, there's things you can do with it now, is what I'm getting at. And the final tab I have on this document is time estimates. This is basically our basic budgeting, right, for all of the time estimates that we've talked about. And so this plan assumes a highly focused effort from a small team. The time estimates can vary based on individual skill, unforeseen challenges, and tool proficiency. This is something that's just going to apply to everybody, but it's always something to think about. So for phase one, pre-production and planning, what I've done is I've basically made the exact same topics and tabs in a table format. And I have under game design for our task of finalizing detailed design document for the single prototype level. I've allocated 16 hours to a senior developer, which would be me, and 8 hours to a novice developer, which would be Spencer. So it's a total of 24 hours that we're estimating it would take to finalize a document of what we want for a single prototype level. Next is outline specific player.
Since this is everything we've already gone through, I don't think we need to go through the basic thing. Because we also had another episode too where we talked about we went through the time estimates in our budgeting episode, I believe. So if someone wants a really good breakdown of how we've gone through this, I think that would be probably one of the first places that they would want to start. Which you might be going like, budgeting, what does that have to do with time? Well, clearly that's an episode you need to watch or listen to. Sorry.
Yes. The reason I wanted to kind of touch on this one was because this form of budgeting is not for, let's say, project management software. Right? Like that episode we touched on is you open up an Excel sheet, this is how you plan it out, this is how you mark it up, right? Which is great. That's typically how, most studios will do that anyways, because like accountants and whatnot. Doing the budgeting the way I have in this document is based off of the tasks that we've outlined for our development plan. So it's not game designers estimated this much time, model takes this much time. This is specific tasks.
Oh, okay.
To this plan.
So it is. It's a little different with like the intention of like where the hours are going then.
Yes. So this is more indie friendly, this version here, because we don't actually need to break it down by department. We don't need to break it down by like estimations and, well, not estimations, but we don't need to like calculate a whole milestone here. We kind of are because it's a prototype. But my point is, doing that Excel version is very intimidating for a lot of people. They're like, I need to know roles.
I hated it for most of the episode.
yeah, right.
But then it made sense, and I started to like it after.
But this is the entry level version. So I'm sorry for everybody listening. I like to show you hard stuff, and then I like to show you the easy stuff, because then it makes sense why you do the hard stuff. So in this one, I've basically broken down all those tabs that I previously outlined, and I've taken the task and I've just allocated an estimated amount of time for a senior developer and a novice developer, which is me and Spencer. That's our team. And then I've just totaled that estimated hours in another column. So I've done that.
I know we've talked about it before, but can you speak to why you've got the senior developer with twice as many hours to work on something versus the novice developer?
Mostly because the novice developer's hours are going to contribute to the senior developer's hours. So when I have, for example, this finalized detailed design document for the single prototype level, I have 16 hours for the senior and 8 for the novice. of that 8 hours, the senior is most likely going to have to look at 5 to 6 hours worth of work of the designers. And that's going to contribute to like 2 or 3 hours of the own senior's work because the novice doesn't know what they're doing. So the senior has to be there to delicately push them in the right direction or forcefully push them in the right direction. Now, people who do not do any form of budgeting or management of like teams and people or resources don't realize that that takes time. So you want to burn out a senior developer or make a senior developer angry, you do it by giving him 8 hours worth of work and then saddling him with additional work to manage other people. And that's basically what this is. I have 16 hours of work estimated to do this design document, but 2 to 3 hours of that is probably just going to review what you've done, make corrections, explain to you why I've made those corrections, or allocating work to you, because that's another part of it. There's going to be an additional hour or two where I'm allocating stuff I think is appropriate for you to contribute work on, but then I still have to review that work as well. So nearly a third of my time and all seniors or leads time is going to be just playing that teacher mentor role. Like that is actual time, and you must account for it, because if you don't, none of your budgets and stuff is going to be on time because you're just not allocating your time for it or the budget.
So then something like this, where like if let's say I was going into a project with somebody with equal level as me, for the most part we might be able to fill it out with our hours being the same. But if I know like if like me and some guy named Jim are going at it, and like I've got more experience with the art side and he's got more experience with the programming, then we would know that when we're setting this up that for some of the stuff with the art, then we might give me, like put me in more of like the senior developer part for that, and then for the for like the programming parts, we would put him for more of the senior thing. It's not just like who's like been working on games the longest. It's more about like the skill level of each person in it, I guess we could say.
Yeah, and in terms of planning for the project, right? The way to look at this breakdown of work is the total time. In a project software, a producer is really only caring that the final detailed design document for this single prototype, level is going to take 24 hours, estimated time. That's really all that the developer cares about. What the team cares about is, of that 24 hours, what time is allocated and what task is allocated to who. And then what's going to happen is once we hit 24 hours, the producer is going to take a look and say, okay, why are we over or why are we under? Like what happened? Where were our estimates off? Where were they good? So all we're doing here is I'm just showing the breakdown of the work of, like how you said, you don't need to know positions. You just have to assign a certain level of expertise to the skills that are going to be required to do the work. And you guess off that. And it's got to be realistic timing, right? So like 16 hours, and we said that we would be allocating, let's say roughly 20 hours a week to work on the game between the two of us. So we know to finalize this one detailed document, that's 24 hours, that's going to be a week. We should know in our planning, which is the next episode, is going to be a week's time for a due date to have this done, is how that's going to work. So it's going to make sense after it all comes together. But this is the easy way to budget out all these tasks and just assume how it works, right? Like creating a flow chart for narrative paths should not take 12 hours, but I'm going to allocate 8 hours for the senior and for the novice, because the senior is probably going to spend 6 hours creating the framework, and then he's going to what'll happen is he'll pass off the content filling to the novice. So the novice is going to get this framework and say, oh, okay, I just have to write out all the sentences. I have to write out like what's going to happen and what's the reason this is happening, and fill this out for every single part of this flow chart. And then that's going to go back to the senior developer, where the senior developer is like, okay, this is good, this is good, this is good. We're missing an interaction here, and this part doesn't line up with this part. Send it back. Then the novice is probably going to use their last hour to make those changes. It's going to go back to the senior. The senior's going to say, yep, this looks good. I'm not going to worry about this now.
What I also
done,
like
basically
about how you've got this set up too is like I'm sure there's going to be stuff on here that's like maybe outline, like just a random example, maybe like the outlining specific player triggered narration events. Maybe we write at first we put like the 8 and 4, we think yeah that's how long it's going to take, but then we realize man we suck at this and it's going to take a lot longer, and so then we can, like with it being the prototype, we can keep in here how much time it we thought it was going to do, but then we can also put in like maybe another column of how much time it actually took. So now we have a record of this, so that when we go to start planning out the next stages and the next sections, we have a good idea of how long it's actually going to take to complete all of that. And so, because like when I first saw this stuff, when we first started talking about making a game, I was furious because I was like, how do we know how many hours it's going to take for something? And then you were saying, we've just got to do it and figure it out. And so especially for like a new team, a lot of this is going to be guesswork of like, maybe I think it's going to take this many hours. I think this is going to take this many hours. Like they can do some research, try to figure out to the best of their ability how long it's going to be. But then this whole process, at least if it's a first video game someone's making like us, this isn't going to be the hours it's going to take to do everything. This is basically the prototype on learning how long it takes for us to complete the tasks as we go.
Exactly. And truth is, when publishers are like, they like your pitch and now they want like data, they want to know how long it's taking, what are your projections, what are your milestones. This is where this kind of stuff really comes in handy, because you can
so
say,
thank God that we went through and did that before talking to a publisher.
yeah, now we know what all this stuff is. It took us to get to this point. There are advantages of this too as well, because certain things like outlining, like you said, specific player triggered narration events, that's basically deciding how does a player trigger the events. Well, we're not randomly going to be adding in new kinds as the game progresses. It's just going to be different forms of what we decide on now. So once we've outlined how this works, we really should not be touching this again unless it's for like a DLC or something that is just so friggin' awesome that we just have to include it, which is going to be really, really, really rare, right? So we know we can lock in that even if this goes over 12 hours and maybe it's 20 hours, it's fine, because in our budgeting for how to produce the rest of the game, we don't have to do it again, right? So you can use this sheet to figure out what it took you as a team to prototype. And you can also use this sheet to figure out how much time it took you to do the stuff that you're going to have to do repeatedly to finish the game, which in the context of this game is going to be creating models, creating transitions, creating audio, creating voiceover, because once all the implementation is done, the rest of the work, when that happens in the future during full production, is just going to be iterative, right? It's just going to be about polishing it and making it great. And that is going to take up the core of development for like implementation, right? It's just making that as smooth as butter as best we can. The rest of the development time is going to be all content creation. Like most of the game is just creating content, really, like funds, like money.
Is that the industry term? Like, because whenever you say it, it makes me think of YouTube videos.
Oh, content?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, when I say content, I am talking about like the stuff that creates content in the game. That can be mission design, that could be art assets, it could be animations.
I was
curious
skins. Though, is that like the industry standard term for it?
More or less. I mean, I've heard some other people refer to it as like filler. It depends. It depends on the team, but I like content because your game's framework is like the box, and the contents, which is the content the player consumes, is all the stuff that you create on top of that. Right, you filled the box with the content. That's just how I've always thought about it, and that's how most of the people I've worked with have thought about it or talked about it. I'm gonna stick with that. Like, you use whatever terms that work best for the listener. Yeah, so you can use this budget sheet to figure out how much time did it actually take us to make those art assets, and also we don't have to calculate implementation because that's another one and done, right? Like, as we discussed, once we create the assets and we try to bring it in engine and discuss and find out there's problems, we fix those problems. It's not going to happen again unless we like change software halfway through development, which you just, as a rule of thumb, never do anyway. right? So we don't have to include that cost when we go to a publisher and they say, how much would it take for chapter 2 and chapter 3 and like how many chapters you're doing for the full game? And we could say, well, we know this is how much art time it takes. This is how much time for VO. This is how much time for putting it all together in level design. This is how much time it took us to iterate and bug fix. This is how much time it took us to do user experience testing. And so you take all that per for your prototype level and you say, this is my standard estimate of 300 hours, let's say, per level. We have 10 levels because this is a relatively small game, let's say. We know that's 300 by 10 is 3,000 hours. So our budget is an ask of 3,000 plus another 500 hours. So that's X amount of money just for mistakes and things that come up that we aren't expecting in the long run. And so whoever's reviewing your pitch document and is now reviewing your budget plans, they can look at that and be like, oh, okay, this is based on some like real data. This is what it took you the first time. And we all know that the more time that you spend doing the same thing, the more efficient, faster you get at doing it. So these initial values have this added effect of being padded for like level 3 or chapter 3 for us, or chapter 4. Like the farther down development we go, the more padded these estimates become, because it's not going to take us that long to whip up an asset that works with our transformation and audio cues and everything else, because we would have already made like 100 at that point, right? We'll be so fast at it. But we're giving them the estimate that we did for our prototype. So it's like 8 hours to make 8 hours to make 4 rocks seems pretty intense, but that's what we did to make this really nice product. You like this product, you should just fund us based off that estimate. That's pretty reasonable.
If anybody's curious to see exactly how James has broken down the whole thing too, like the entire document that we've been talking through this whole time, we'll have a link to that in the description as well, so anybody can see the full breakdown of it. And if they really wanted to, they could even use it as like the blueprint for the starting foundations for their own. But don't tell James I said that.
No, it's why we're doing this.
Were there any specific other parts of it that you wanted to talk about?
Not really, just that like it's all more or less the same, or like it's the same 2-3 days for all the tasks, right? Because I have tried to make this as like concise as I can, and
Okay.
it's just a good rule of thumb to do that. Make it small, make it measurable, make it something to script, something that's like clear what the result is, so it's easier to budget for. And that, so yeah, the last thing to touch on here is that just our total overall estimated hours is 1,000 hours. We're like 1 hour short off of me just, random, not random, but like guessing. So it's going to take us roughly 1,000 hours. So
Just a little bit of time.
it's a little bit of time, but when we talked about our team and what we thought of as acceptable time commitments, right, for this project, I think this is important to bring up now. Is we said, does this show up over here?
What
No,
was it,
it
like
doesn't. Okay.
6 months?
Well, we said 6 months, I think was the initial thing, but we ended up saying that we could probably contribute. I think it was 60. I could be wrong. But
60
I think
months?
no, 60 hours. Sorry, 60 hours per month of development is
Mhm.
what I thought we said that we could probably contribute between the two of us. So if we took that 1,000 hours divided by 60, that's 17 months that this prototype is going to take us to make. So in earlier episodes, I think it was a few ago, we talked about why it's important to do budgeting, and I showed you that big scary Excel sheet. Right. So this is where those chats about budgeting properly and how it's not just about money is important. This is where it actually comes into play. Is because now we have this prototype plan. We got a rough estimate that seems pretty accurate for our team's structure, novice structure, whatever. So we know that roughly it's going to take about 1,000 hours to implement this, because all the tasks clear, they're direct, it's an achievable result, it doesn't require massive, it doesn't have lots of dependencies, it's easy to figure out and estimate. So this is fairly realistic, this budget. Yeah, 1,000 hours. So 60 hours per month between the two of us. Yeah, 17 months of development. This is where we ask.
If you had told me a while ago that it was going to take us 17 months to make a prototype, I would have said, that's ridiculous. I'm out. Like I can't do that. But since we've gone through all this stuff, even though you said 17 months, I didn't flinch. It still feels achievable because of how this has all been broken down. And if anything, it made me, I don't understand how to explain it, but it made me more excited. I was like, 17 months sounds like a challenge. Like that's not like a bad challenge, but like a good challenge.
That's good. But yeah, so you know what? It's very easy to see, right? Like why so many prototypes and so many indie teams that sometimes start with a lot of heat, right? Like get a lot of attention really quickly and they just burn out so fast, sometimes not even releasing their first game. This is a good reason why. This is a good actual, like, based on data, everything that we've been talking about for like 5 episodes now of how that happens. It's because they come up with an idea. It gets lots of traction. They start putting on all these, developing right away. They just jump into it. They start tweaking. They start iterating. Now they're in scope creep. Now they're in all this stuff. And like they're not even at a prototype phase. And like they're 2 years into development. And
sounds like 1,000 hours turning into
changed.
2,000.
Yeah, very quickly. And that's assuming everybody stays on board for the whole time, right? But because we had those initial conversations, because we're putting in the work to lay out this blueprint, it doesn't really matter. Like you said, it doesn't really matter how long this is going to take because we know where it's going. We have an expectation and we have an expected plan about how to get there. So it's way more achievable. It's also way more likely, just statistically, that we're going to get there. That's why, like, when you go to do a business plan to start a business, this is all the stuff the banks ask for. And not just banks, but like other institutions, lending institutions, business programs. They want to see you put in this level of work before they give you money because it's way more likely that you're going to stick through it and get it done.
It's not just showing up with a briefcase going, yeah, this is my loaf of bread. I'm going to make a bakery.
Yeah, right? And I don't know, like people just don't make
Taste
that
it, it's good bread.
Sold. Take my money. Yeah. But this is, the next step here would be as a team to discuss, is that an acceptable time frame still? Because
my answer is I've never been more excited.
Well, this is great, but I'm talking hypothetically for other people.
Right, sorry, please continue.
Is to revisit that initial conversation about what do we want to get out of this project? What are our time commitments and what are we willing to put in? Is it still in alignment? Because as you know, this has taken like a month or 2 or 3 to get through all this stuff, right?
Well, I feel
not
like
working full time, but
I feel like ours is a little different too because we've been doing it as a part of the podcast, and so that slowed down the process of it. Because there's certain things where we've waited to work on it until after we were able to record the episode. So
yes.
Although
but even so,
if I didn't have you helping me through all this, then 3 months sounds very, very understandable. If I'd been going through the podcast as someone who'd never had experience, maybe even longer than 3 months, just because of the first time going through and having to learn all this stuff. So thank you, James, for being my cheat code.
You're welcome. I'm not cheat coding you. I'm just giving you what's the high level boost?
Not a cheat code. You're just the player's guide.
Yeah, player's guide. There we go. This is the player's guide for development.
We got to rename the podcast.
I know.
Goodbye, Indie Innovators. Hello, player's guide to game development.
Yep. Oh, that's good. Anyway,
well, it's too late now.
Yeah, so revisit the conversation with your team now that you have a concrete expectation of what work's involved and how long it's going to take and where the breakdown of the work is, so that it makes sense to you. Because this is also where you can see, like, is this a very coding dependent prototype? It's going to take a lot of work from the coder. Is your coder somebody who has like minimal amount of investment in the project because he's actually a pretty foundational figure? If he disappears or burns out halfway through, it's going to massively impact your project. Whereas if your game is art, it's light on art needs. If an artist leaves, it's probably not the end of the world. You can work with that, right? So this gives you that expectation of how to figure out, is my team composition still good? Do we need to find a programmer who's willing to come on board with the same project? That's also hard, right? But at least now you have all this documentation and everything else to talk about, and you have a solid plan, so it's not so bad. Anyways, so you could talk about that. Expectations, are people still willing to do it? I think 17 months is still pretty long. And I know that development time, that's 60 hours per month is not, I think that's actually probably too little, because I said I could probably do like 10 hours a week minimum. So that's still 40 hours just from me. And if you manage to do like 2 hours every night, right, that you could potentially match that, that's 80 hours. So, and that's what,
With
80
weekends, I
hours
don't
per
see
month.
why we couldn't do that. Or why,
Yeah,
I
even
should say
on
why I couldn't
weekends.
do that.
Exactly. That's just setting one whole day aside just to work on that. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's sorry, what did I say? That's 10 hours per week. That's 480. So that's 80. And if we take our 999 hours and we divide that by 80 instead, now it's 12 months, or well, 12 and a half months, right? So it's more manageable, right? But it just gives you a way to actually finally quantify how much time the prototype design is actually going to take. And this should also now give a lot more weight to when everybody on the internet, whether they have different design methodologies or whatever it is, when they're all telling new developers to start small, this is actually what they're trying to talk about. They're trying to say, start with a small scope. Scope down a lot. Make your first game an infinite runner where you're just like hopping over stuff, and like that should be your first game. Why? Because it's way more achievable. And if you haven't done the work that we have, like we're motivated. We're like, yeah, we finally got like the roadmap is here. This is so much better, right? Like this is great. But those other guys, they're talking about starting small because something that's like achievable in like 300 hours. They want something that you could do by yourself on weekends over the course of a couple months, and you still feel good, so that you'll carry that momentum into the next project, and you can build up to a project like this where it's 1,000 hours for the prototype. So that's how you can validate that way of like thinking. I just don't want to say anybody is doing anything bad. I'm just trying to say, like, this is the reason why they say that and how it comes into play with context, like with actual evidence and stuff that you can look at and understand and be like, oh, okay, that makes more sense now.
The toughest part for me is in hearing all that still is I also know that, I mean, we could put in all of this work and it could still be a bust. And we also could have just jumped right in and just been like, whoa, let's go, and just flown by the seat of our pants. And we could have, maybe it would have been great, you know? Who knows?
And,
But
that's game
and
development.
it's a big one, James. If we just jumped in and flew by the seat of our pants, if it was great, awesome. If it was a bust, that would have sucked. But we wouldn't have the foundations that would have made the next one easier, and the next one after that even easier, and the next one after that even easier and easier. Not as in like easier to make, but easier to get in and keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that
And
whether this
I've
is a
also
bust
carried
or
most
not.
of the stuff over into my work's life too. So
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, I think that whether or not this works out, or it goes anywhere or whatnot, I don't care personally. Like, I'm just excited to share this process, and hopefully some people learn some stuff, and it helps them approach their own developments better. Like, that's really what I'm after. Is it's so heartbreaking to have to do game triage work trying to salvage a project, and you come on board and the teams are just like, we're just fried, like we don't know what we're doing, like this is where we're going, and we have all these obligations and there's all these contracts, and we're just like, what do we do, right? Like that's tough, because you have to come in and explain everything that we've been talking about and be like, okay, we got to go back to
oh
basics now. This
man,
is what you do.
having to implement all this stuff after being halfway through a project would be even worse than just starting with it.
Oh yeah, it's brutal. It's so brutal, because often there's so much turnover. Like the original people aren't even there anymore. There's code where some people don't even know how the code works. It's just that's the function we don't touch, and like there's all kinds of stuff like that, and you have to somehow reorganize it all and get the team on track and figure out what the goal is or what the goal
Yeah,
should
no,
be,
thank you.
because yeah, it's tough, and not projects that reach that stage that are trying to salvage, not many of them make it because, well, as you've come to learn, there's a lot to it, and the expectation is often that we'll fix it in like 3 months, and it's
Yeah, we'll fix it in post.
we'll fix it in post. No, like, are you gonna spend twice as much time doing this? No. So, uh, but yeah, that wraps up everything I wanted to talk about today. Other than that, coming next is going to be how do we put this in some way to track it? Like you suggested, is we have an estimated time. Where do we put it to actually say, oh, this took me 3 hours, this took me 6 hours?
I am both looking forward to that and not looking forward to it.
It should be
But
a
I'm
pretty
sure
quick
once we get into it, it won't be so bad. It'll just
Yeah.
be the initial of laying it out and figuring out how to do it. And then once that's done, it's just data entry after that point.
That's basically what we're doing here, right? Like if we just like how I've broken this down based off of tasks, like the topics are just like categories, like art assets. Here's all the asset types. Here's audio. Here's all the audio types. Here's all our implemented game design.
What are we going to be using to break it down for our episode?
My vote is Hack and Plan, just because I've been really attached to that one lately. But
I was
am
just saying
open
that
to
so you had a
someone else.
chance to say hack and plan. So.
I know. I'm just playing along. No, we're definitely going to use Hack and Plan. Yeah,
If
and then
anybody
like how
doesn't
we
know what
listen.
hack and plan is, I highly recommend checking it out. There's a free version you can do, and it's a great. I mean, I don't remember the term, but it's like for game design typically, but you can really use it for any project management. It's really versatile. I really like it. So.
Yeah, I think the thing where a lot of people are that I've shown to who have like taken an interest in it professionally is that it's a combination of a game design document and your project management. They're kind of one and the same. So as you're writing your document and you fill out hack and plan with your game design, you can create all of your stuff directly in it and assign tasks directly off of that. And there are some neat tricks that I could show you to make things look like progress bars, which are amazing. So you can actually see the parts of your game fill up, which is super motivating. Yeah, and there's some metrics that we can also go over to do some of what we ended with here of seeing like how much time did we estimate and how much time did it actually take us, and we can see that all broken down. Yeah, and it's a great free tool. That's the other part, is it compared to a lot of other free tools, it gives you the biggest tool set I've seen for sure.
If anybody's interested in being a part of our journey or sharing their own, or if you have any questions for James, even best place to get a hold of us is the Indie Innovators podcast. As well, it could be questions related to this episode or previous episodes or something else entirely, as well as if there's anything you're really interested in learning about in game development that you are unsure about or would just like to know more about in general, let us know too, and I will make James do all the research and put together everything needed for the episode.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, no, feel free to reach out with us. We've had a few people join now into our Discord community who are sharing some of the projects they're working on, even game jams. So like, you don't need to have a full team. You don't have to have a solid plan. It's just if you're interested and you like our way of doing things, yeah, come hang out, come ask questions, or ask on how to get started. I'm pretty open book, so.
And if anybody really liked the idea of the name, The Player's Guide to Game Development, unfortunately, by the time this episode's come out, I've already bought the domain. So sucks to be you.